So, hey, Holly.
Hey, Dave.
How you doing?
I feel very distant from you, unfortunately.
Yeah, well, we are we are keeping our distance, and we're trying to figure out how to talk back and forth with each other. But right now we have a third person joining us, and this is Nick Egan, a visual design artist. You've seen so many of his music videos, commercials. He's worked in film. He's worked album covers, 45s, with Oasis, Sonic Youth, Bob Dylan. INXS, thank you. Kylie Minogue. Yes. So we're going to dig into all of this. So we want to welcome Nick. Thank you for joining us.
Hi there, Dave. Hi there, Holly. Pleasure to be on your show.
Thank you so much for joining us. This is What Difference Does It Make, the podcast. So thank you, Nick. Let's get going.
But just to sort of segue into what you're doing, I think it's fantastic what you're doing. And it really, what it does is, when I first moved to LA in 1987, 88, the end of 87, beginning of 88, literally the stuff you're talking about in KROQ in particular was all I listened to. You know, and it was just before MTV really became, well, MTV was around, but when you were in the car, you couldn't obviously watch MTV, but all you'd listen to was KROQ and all those bands and those specific bands like Stan Ridgway and Oingo Boingo and what's the other band that I mentioned in my Dramarama, you know. I would never have heard of those bands if I'd been in England or even in New York. You know, I think those bands were very, very sort of LA centric and in particular with that radio station. And so I think what you're doing is great. So is it primarily based around KROQ? Is it just generally about the 80s? Yeah,
well, that's where we grew up in LA. So that, you know, as teens growing up, that was a huge influence on our lives. And and just all the music. So it's kind of a starting point for us. And then we kind of, you know, that kind of leads us to talking to people like you.
Now, what is your favorite of the two of you? What would you say? And that's a tough thing to answer. What would be your favorite all-time song from that period?
Favorite all-time song?
Yeah.
Dave's might be more obscure. Dave's yours might be a little more obscure than mine. I'll tell you.
David's is. What would yours be then, Holly? Would you say?
I was a huge Cure fan.
Oh yeah.
And so, just like Heaven, like probably every other girl growing up in LA, but that's one of my favorites.
And it's funny because the Cure were much bigger here than they were in England even, and same with Depeche Mode. They were massive on the West Coast, weren't they?
Yeah,
that's another one of mine also. Everything about them.
Yeah, we kind of talked about that before, how Depeche Mode is kind of viewed as an LA band. There were literally riots in the streets when they had a record signing. I think it was like in the early 90s, I think. Right at La Cienega and Beverly, the warehouse there. They shut down the streets there. That. Yeah, the streets were shut. It's crazy.
And you know, and of course they had that, which is now, you can't imagine, their first single was Killing an Arab. And you can't imagine how anyone would ever get away with that anymore.
Oh, for the Cure. Yeah, that's right. I know.
For the Cure. But yeah, and Depeche Mode, funny enough, they were from where my sister lives in the south part of England, in Sussex. So from that kind of neighborhood. But a lot of people in England thought they were American. So it's funny. But I think LA were probably... Now, your taste then, what would that be? What would that, when Holly says obscure, David, what would you say?
It's not obscure. It's my all-time favorite is REM. So I kind of, and then I go from there.
Right. So bands. Yeah. So really you're talking bands more than songs, really.
Yeah, for the most part. Yeah. I mean, I do love the one-hit wonders, the ones that, and actually that's kind of what's been fun reviewing on KROQ is these songs that you kind of forgot about, but that's, you know, like once you hear them, like, oh yeah, I used to love this song. Whatever happened to this band? And you know, so it's
whatever did happen.
No, I'm just saying it's just a fun kind of exercise for Holly and I to go over these songs that we grew up with.
So no, I didn't realize that when we met, David, in the height of youth soccer, that you were such involved in music in the way you were.
Yeah, I don't know how it happened, but back in the LinkedIn day when you first go into LinkedIn, it asks, for all your contacts or whatever. And maybe you were on that list, or maybe when you signed up for LinkedIn, I was on your list, and somehow like, oh, okay. Usually I tended to reject a lot of the people from AYSO, but I'm sure I saw your resume and like, oh, he's got maybe I'll accept his invitation, and then, forgot about you. And then you posted something on LinkedIn. I can't remember what it was. And then I had to look you up again and like, oh my God, this guy's perfect for us. We gotta bring him in for the podcast. And so,
because you've directed most of our favorite music videos.
Oh, really? Oh, that's good. Yeah, that's I just did an interview for a Duran fan website, and we talked about that. And one of the funny things I thought about it from a fan's point of view is I realized that fans see everything from a completely different point. And this doesn't relate to you guys, because you're not the fans I'm talking about. I'm talking about your fans of music. These are like obsessive fans of one group, and they, they become so bogged down in their own dogma about it. But they asked me a question. And they said, didn't you feel like when you were working with Duran Duran on the perfect day, the excitement of working with the original band members of Duran Duran? And I said, you know what? If I was like that, I'd be a fan, but I'm a director, and I can't look at things in that same way as a fan does. But I can appreciate the way fans are with things. I look at those guys as just being guys I work with. Sometimes I step back and go, wow, that's pretty amazing. It's like for example, recently I just got back in touch with Ian Astbury from The Cult, and he lives in LA as well now. And he that was one of my most popular album covers, the Sonic Temple album cover. And as I get older, I start to see that my place in music history is kind of established. It doesn't really help me in the present, because what people care about is the past, and I'm very proud of my past, but I also need to sort of survive into the future. I can't just live off the past. You know what I'm saying?
Of course.
But yeah, so music videos from my point of view were the greatest of all the art forms, because what you're doing, you're putting music together with it, moving images. And when I was a kid, I used to listen to T-Rex on headphones, and I'd close my eyes and I'd get all these images coming into my head. So in a way, music videos took that away from the listener. They because they're not really, especially during the 90s, it's not really a song that doesn't have a video to it, and that is sort of impinges into your thought pattern. So you end up not being able to create your own images in the way you used to be able to before music videos come along, if that makes sense to you.
Sure, but they were right. But they were a great promotional tool, especially when you were creating these videos. This is when the heyday of MTV. It was like late 80s, early 90s. It was essential. It was something that needed to be done. It was because a lot of people who didn't live in LA, New York, London, they had no access to hearing this music, and they had these videos for it.
Well, the funny thing was, in the beginning, and I was living in New York before I moved to LA, I was a snob because I thought that music videos were secondary to album covers, because album covers, to me, had a relationship with album covers. It was this kind of like a map of all the things. It was like a map to what went on around that particular album cover. Whether it was like with Bowie and David Sanborn played sax on Aladdin Sane, or whether it was Billy Preston played on the Rolling Stones record. You kind of got to know all these other musicians because you went through the credits of these things. Mm-hmm. And so when I was at the peak of doing album covers, say for example INXS, I wanted to do a gatefold. Gatefold was the sort of the ultimate you could do. So you fold out with full color, and then an insert that was printed all over it. That to me was like a little kind of special thing that you had with an album cover. So music videos were different because you didn't get to look at them when you wanted to. You got to look at them when other people decided you could look at them. They weren't tangible. And whereas a record cover was something that you could hold. And I grew up, and I'm sure probably both of you to a degree grew up in the fact where you would borrow your friends' records and you would tape them, or someone would say, listen to this album. That's how I got to discover the New York Dolls. My friend had bought a copy of the Dolls Too Much Too Soon, and because of the cover. And then we kind of got into the Dolls, and you kind of discover things without even knowing what the music was like through an album cover. So I was very against doing music videos in the beginning. And then I ended up doing Real Wild Child, the Iggy Pop video from Blah, 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 of which I did the album cover for Blah, Blah, Blah. And I came to LA, and I ended up staying in LA after that, and I loved it. I thought it was a fantastic medium to do and create this whole kind of story around the song. So I kind of was converted into this sort of the culture of doing videos. However, I struggled in the beginning because I was so well known as an album cover designer. People didn't take me serious as a music video director. And so I thought it made perfect sense that an album cover designer would do a video. Mm-hmm. But the labels didn't get it. They record labels tend to be very sort of one-dimensional. They don't want to have too much. They want to know exactly what it is you do. They don't want to know, well, you do this, you do that, you do this. You do that kind of confusion. They wanted to keep it very, very specific. So I had to stop doing album covers and then focus on doing music videos. And it took me some time to do it. I mean, there's some really, really kind of like crappy bands. And then I got to work with, I did Kylie Minogue. And this is the irony of it all, was when I did Kylie Minogue, it was the opposite of everything I ended up doing eventually. She really let me do what I wanted to do and really let me do something that was like a little bit more edgy for her. And I did Step Back in Time, which is kind of a 70s retro thing. And then that video, funny enough, led me to doing the Soup Dragons. Mm. And the Soup Dragons got nominated for Best Music Video, Best Alternative Video at the MTV Awards. And then I ended up becoming the alternative music video guy. So it was funny that Kylie Minogue really led into that, I think. So you can't really ever write. I know I'm probably like both of you, is I'm open to all kinds of music. And I knew Kylie because of Michael from INXS. They were dating at the time. And she was a lovely person. And even though I knew that to a certain degree, she wasn't credible in areas that I was working in, she was really generous to me in terms of what it was I wanted to do creatively. And that in itself helped me go on to become a very sort of high-profile music video director that ended up being responsible for breaking several bands, including Oasis and Alanis Morissette. So I thought there was a sort of a weird irony involved in that. And just to back you up on that, when I was Sonic Youth wanted me to do a video, and I went to New York to meet Thurston and Kim, and my executive producer at Satellite Film said to me, whatever you do, don't mention Kylie Minogue, because, they're this credible indie band. So I go have a great meeting with Kim and Thurston. As I'm leaving, Thurston says to me, oh, by the way, we love that Kylie Minogue video. So I thought that was really funny that everyone tried to avoid Kylie, but she actually had more credibility with the bands than the actual labels and the production companies did. So yeah, that was really an interesting sort of viewpoint.
Thurston is a huge Madonna fan. He had the Ciccone Youth was a band, like a offshoot that they did. They did Madonna covers.
And that's great, and I think that you can't underestimate. I mean, I can tell you a story that works the opposite direction. I did a video for EMI in London for a group called Charles and Eddie. I didn't really want to do the video, but the commissioner at the label said, if you do Charles and Eddie for me, I need help. You can do Radiohead or Blur. And so I said, okay. So I did the Charles and Eddie video, and actually those guys were great as well. They were very, very sweet, but it wasn't anything I was particularly wanted to put on my reel. And she set me up with a conversation with Tom York. And I had this telephone conversation with him. We were talking, and he was saying, well, people don't think we've got much. We're not very colourful, and I like your work because it's really colourful, and we want to inject some of that into it. And I said to him, oh, yeah. I recently did a video with Bon Jovi, and I did do a video with Bon Jovi. And I said, he was very much into this smiley kind of happy thing, and I want him to be the opposite. And then the phone went completely dead. And he said, can you get Dilly back on the phone for me? Yeah. So I did. And then Dilly told me, the commissioner, Tom said he can't work with anyone that's worked with Bon Jovi. So that was the end of that. And so I just thought, what an idiot,
That's ridiculous.
unlike Thurston, he couldn't see that. Yeah, there was room for everybody in this business, you know. So that was an interesting story from that point of view. And I've never liked. I mean, I love some of Radiohead's songs, but I could never. After that happened, I could never stand him after that and his seriousness.
Wow.
Which is kind of sad, but that's what happens. You have a personal encounter, and it colors everything.
Yeah, I know. And so there ended my Radiohead video career.
Turns out you didn't need them.
No, exactly. Sad thing about that period and the period we're talking about. So really, I was more known in the 80s for my record covers, where I did the Cult and Psychedelic Furs and INXS, and then I transitioned as I went into the 90s. I started to do more videos, and I started to get nominated and for music videos. And there was a point where there was an article written on me in one of the trades, and it called me his MTV-ness, which I thought was funny, because I managed to I mean, I didn't personally ever think that I did this, but the videos I was making for Candlebox and Oasis really got their breaks because of the videos I'd done for them. And then so you reach this kind of plateau where you think, wow, this is great. This is like, it reminded me of what the 1930s must have been like in Hollywood, where it was like, it was this new art form that it begun and then suddenly was blooming into this big thing. And you think it's never going to end. And then suddenly, bam, it crashes like the stock market.
Or like
it went from being with the internet, you know.
Like every rock band, though, they start at the bottom, they slowly plateau, and then it's suddenly they're not the hottest thing ever. So I mean,
and that was in terms of that. But I'm talking about the music video business in general. It went from, and it kind of coincided with two things. It coincided with MTV not playing so many videos and doing all those reality shows, and it coincided with the internet and YouTube becoming popular.
Yeah.
And so what I liked about KROQ and MTV was it was a unifying place. It was a place that we could all go to. There wasn't the confusion of the different variations of it so much. And MTV, everybody had it on in their home. So everybody had a sense of what was going on. Everyone could focus in. Now the focus is all over the place. But I like that. I like the fact there was that one thing that was it had a lot of power, and that power wasn't always used very well. And it made a lot of decisions that was based on personal favoritism on things. But it certainly was a fantastic when it lasted. It was great, and it was great. Really great to be part of that, because you had a great sense of I got to choose the best music. I had heard of Oasis, and I thought I'd like to do a video for them. And so I said to my people at Satellite Films, I'd like to do a video for Oasis. And boom, they went out and they got it. And there was that doesn't happen quite as much anymore as it used to. And that may be because I'm from a different generation, and you have to eventually hand the torch over to somebody else. But I also realized the great thing from working in contemporary videos is that you can I do it all myself now. I edit, I shoot, I do the whole thing myself. That wouldn't have been possible 15 years ago. You need a big crew. But the problem is you don't need as much money, so you don't get as much money. So the budgets were like $250. Now the budgets are anything between $6,000 and $15,000 for the kind of groups I do anyway.
Yeah.
So there's, with the exception of Duran, who I still work with them, and they have a relatively big budget, but that's still being cut back. But yeah, so there is a great nostalgia to that period, not just from the fans, but also from the people that were part of it, and working with people like the Cult and Richard Butler from Psychedelic Furs and Michael Hutchins from INXS. Again, having a great creative relationship with them was really a favorite piece of my life or career. Really was there when you had these bands and you were part of seeing their involvement. And I remember with INXS, I had a specific thing with them was they had Listen Like Thieves, which is a great record, and What You Need, which was a fantastic record when I heard it in New York, because it had that rock but dance element to it. And then I got involved with them, and I thought, they needed to be considered an international band, and not a an Australian band, because they had this kind of Australian kind of eccentricity to them, and I thought that they looked much more international. So I wanted to make that cover very, very international. They could have been from any city in the world, and it worked. And it was a brilliant album, but it also worked on every level because of the way we approached the marketing of the record, and that had its strengths back then. I don't know if it does so much anymore, because as I said, a lot of bands are very put out their own material, which is great. It doesn't seem a particular sense of focus on stuff. Bands tend to get their friends to do their videos, which is great to a degree, but they don't have the quality or the sense of a lot of the videos I see, especially from independent bands, you don't know who they are. You don't seem to get who they are as people. Whereas The Cure, for example, and the Furs, you completely got who they were. You knew who Richard Butler was. You knew who Robert Smith was. You knew who the rest of the band were. And that's kind of been lost a little bit with independent bands these days. You know, and they all end up to be homogenized and look a little bit the same. So, and there are obviously exceptions to that rule, but there was a real strength. And, you know, like we said, when you say The Cure, you immediately have in your head exactly what that band were and who what kind of they represented. And that was a thing that I enjoyed. That is making sure that people knew that this band was different from this band and this band was different from that band. And now I just think everybody seems to want to try and do the same thing. So, but that's just movie. It's not me being this, overcritical. It's just that it's a different generation, you know.
Right.
And people have different attitudes to it.
Okay, so let's take a break right now while we have the time. We're still talking with Nick Egan, special visual artist. These are great stories. You enjoying this, Holly?
I am. So let's hurry back. Welcome back. Let's get back to it with Nick Egan.
Well, let's go to the beginnings. We've talked about how things used to be and how you grew up, getting associated with bands or learning about bands. So you were attending, was it Watford College of the Arts and Design? Okay.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So let's get a look at, let's get a feel for what your dorm room looked like. Did you have posters up there or well,
this is the funny thing was just before I started Watford Art School in 1976, I'd just been seeing David Bowie on the Thin White Duke tour at Wembley, and I worked with my stepsister, and we had limited access tickets, which basically was I was right at the very back row, right by the side of the stage. So the only time I saw Bowie was when he stepped to the front of the stage. So for the most of the show, I didn't even see it. Yeah, and I remember leaving and walking down the road, and we almost got run over by a fleet of limousines, and one of them was David Bowie. There must have been 6 or 7 limos. And then a couple of days later, my friend, I was about to go to art school, I hadn't started art school, said, there's this band I've read about, they're called the Sex Pistols. They're playing at this club called Dingwalls. So we went to go and try and see them, and the show had been cancelled. And then we found out they were doing a residency at a place called the 100 Club. So we went along to that, and it was a small little, it used to be a jazz club, the 100 Club, and I'm standing in there with him, and there was about 50 people in there. And then suddenly the guy that was standing next to me got up on stage and started to sing, and I was so taken by that because it was a complete opposite of what happened with the Bowie show, where it was all very distant, and yet it was nowhere in touching distance. These guys were just like me. And so we went every week to see them play the residency, and then one of the days they had the Clash support them. And one of my friends at art school called Mick North was a drummer, and he had gone to an art school called Byam Shores with Paul Simonon. And he said to me, when next time you see Paul, say hello to him. So I did. I saw Paul, and then Paul said, you should do one of our record covers. Yeah, one day. It was that simple. It really wasn't like, can we see your portfolio? Mm-hmm. So Pete and I did the White Man in Hammersmith Palais single cover. It was the one that had the gun. We took the idea from the Lichtensteins thing. And we took the idea from the old Jamaican record studios, and Bernie Rhodes from the Clash was now he was still managing the Clash, but he had a band called Dexys Midnight Runners, and he asked us if we would do the Dexys album cover. This is while we were still at art school. We hadn't even graduated from art school.
Right.
And we did the first Dexys cover, and then when I was at EMI one day, because on the EMI with Duran, Bow Wow Wow, and Dexys Midnight Runners, I bumped into Malcolm McLaren, who was a friend of Bernie's. And me and Malcolm became friends, and he asked me to do the Bow Wow Wow, See Jungle, Go Join Your Gang, album cover. Mm-hmm. And Bow Wow Wow were also really popular in LA. I mean, I came to LA. The first time I ever came to LA was to work, didn't direct it, but worked on the video for I Want Candy, the one that's in Venice Beach where they got their heads in the sand. Mm-hmm. Had a great time. Got my first tattoo done at the Sunset Tattoo Parlor opposite the Hyatt on Sunset Boulevard.
The Riot House.
The legendary, the Hyatt House, legendary from Led Zeppelin days. And so I got to have this, experience, coming to LA and seeing how, they were more popular in LA than they were in London. So I got to, and that album cover became a notorious cover because of the fact that Annabella was 14 and she was naked on the cover. But I think that whole sexual side of it was nothing that we even considered. We took it after a masterpiece, the Manet painting, and we were looking at that and kind of comparing it to the morals of today. The fact there was this naked girl and two men that were fully clothed, we were asking questions of what the morals are. But people looked at it in another way, and then we had the police trying to arrest myself and Malcolm for having a minor naked in a public park, and I had to fly to Amsterdam on her 16th birthday to get to sign an affidavit to say that she had completely, was in support of this, and so we dodged the bullet by that. And then the album cover became this great source of controversy. I wanted it to be just a picture with no letters on it and no title on it, but the Americans were the Americans. It was a very, very super conservative. The record industry was super conservative. They were on RCA Records, which is the Elvis Presley's label. And it was like, they really didn't want to do this thing, but we convinced them into doing it. But everything had to be, the title of and the name of the band always had to be on the top of the cover. And it was really, it was easier to persuade them to do the photograph than it was to get them not to have the type on it. So that's what I mean conservative. The picture almost didn't matter to them. It was all for racking. So, what it's like, you guys, when you used to go to town, you used to go through the racks and look out for what the name of the band was, because it was always on the top. So that was their big marketing concern. So that's how that started.
Did you take the picture, or were you the photographer for this?
No, I was art director.
So it was your idea?
It was mine and Malcolm's idea. Malcolm had said he wanted to do a painting, and there was 3 paintings. There was one called Liberty Leads the People, and it's my favorite painting. That's the one I wanted. It's a picture of Liberty in the French Revolution. She's got the French flag, and she's got one breast showing, and she's got this, and it'd be by the side of all these revolutionaries, and that to me had the impact of it. It was a woman. It was like, it showed strength. The woman was a strong one, and because we had Annabella, I figured it looked good because was this woman in this band, these 3 men in this band, and that she was the leader. There was another one called The Bolt, and it was a picture of a man trying to lock the door, obviously to have his way with this woman, and she was trying to stop him from bolting the door. That's why it's called The Bolt. Mm-hmm. And then there was the one, Breakfast on the Grass, or the Déjeuner sur l'herbe, which was the Manet painting. Yeah. And then Malcolm wanted the Manet, so we went with the Manet painting. So it was, and then we got a photographer, and I art directed, even though I didn't really know what art directing was. I just left art school, and in fact, I hardly even really learned anything at art school. So it was like directing. So you kind of set up a picture, and you said, "Oh, can we do it this way? Can we do it that way?" And so I art directed that, which was ironic because when it came to paying, the label didn't want to pay me because they said I hadn't done any graphics on the cover, because it was just, the original thing was just the photo and nothing else on it. So I thought that was kind of funny and ironic, but they didn't want to pay me because they didn't think I did any work. So we did that. That is actually, you can see the photo shoot. It's on YouTube, believe it or not. and you can see me looking through the camera on it. And I think, wow, that is such a rarity. That's like a rare, because nowadays everyone would have a phone, and everybody would, the makeup artists would have been shooting it. But this is when video just started. It's 1981. So this is just when videos had started, and Andy O, the cameraman, his assistant, had got this gigantic, cumbersome, huge VCR, video recording thing. And he had filmed some of that. And there's some of the footage online. It was kind of remarkable, looking at it and looking at yourself when you were like, I guess I was 22 or something. And then the band and how that photograph evolved. But that continued on to work with Malcolm, and I worked with Malcolm on one of the great seminal 1980s records, which was Duck Rock, which had Buffalo Girls on it. And I got to go to the, I was just talking about this the other day. Not only was I lucky enough to be part of the original punk movement, but I also got to be part of the original hip hop movement in New York when it came to Manhattan, because it had just moved into Manhattan, and Malcolm had bumped into Africa Bambaataa, and Africa Bambaataa told him about this hip hop movement was going on, and nobody even knew what hip hop was then. Nobody in Manhattan, only people in South Bronx knew it. So when I did the Duck Rock cover, I got to work with Don D. White, who was a graffiti artist, Keith Haring. I got to spend 5 or 6 weeks just getting involved with the hip hop movement. And really, I was thinking that Malcolm really did sort of embrace that culture and world culture, because he went to South Africa and he did the stuff in South Africa. We went to Appalachia, the Appalachian Mountains, and did work with these bluegrass hillbilly bands, that were in the 80s. And it was one of the first cool world albums that came out. And Buffalo Girls was probably the most sampled record. I think it goes down to one of the most sampled records in music history, with everyone from Eminem to Pharrell Williams being inspired by it. So that had a big influence on the multicultural side of things, and how we start to look at world music globally more than just in an insular way. So that was probably the most exciting, when I look back at it, period of my life, because we were going into territory never charted before. And then we went to Fans, and Fans was the crossing over of classical opera music into sort of techno music or electronic music. And nobody had done that at that point. And so we were doing this because Malcolm had that fashion line with Vivienne Westwood, and we were doing the music for the shows. And the music for the shows were like a demo tape for the albums. So we crossed. There was Planet Rock, which was Africa Bambaataa, and then there was the Salsa Smurf, which is another one of these electronic hip-hop things, which came from Bambaataa being influenced by Kraftwerk. And then we put this kind of stuff on top of it, and that's how that came out as an album. So he was very clever in the fact that he used this in this very hip fashion crowd in Paris and in London, and saw what the reaction is, and then made that into an album. So I have to say that was a very, very exciting period to be involved in music generally, because it definitely was making the borders less dogmatic. You could mix different. I mean, when you think about Malcolm doing Buffalo Girls, it was a square dance mixed with the current hip hop scratching thing in New York. And I said to him once, but you couldn't have. I mean, you could be more different. And he said, no. If you think about it, if you think about what square dance music, it's a call. It's a caller, not a singer, saying, take your partner by the hand and do-si-do your partner. And rap music is everybody in the house say, yeah, it was a call. And I just thought that was brilliant. I thought that was a brilliant, absolutely fantastic way of seeing the similarities that nobody else saw in it. That you could put square dancing with this hip urban music in New York. I thought it was genius and inspirational. And Malcolm was that inspiration, because at the time I was saying I was getting bored with album covers because they were just this square. And what could you do with a square? You've done as much as you could do. And he said, well, don't imagine it's a square. Just imagine there's this big painting and you take a square of that painting. So you just take a part of it out. And he goes, that's interesting. That means people need to think more. And he said, and even if my name is not on it completely, that's part of the story that people go, I wonder what that was like. And that's what I did. And if you look at that cover, you see that the Malcolm McLaren goes around the back. And I thought that was a brilliantly inspirational thing to say to somebody creatively, to not look at it as a square, look at it as something bigger. And then you take a square thing and you draw around it and you cut that out, and that's part of the bigger picture. And therefore, it kind of creates a mystery around it. So yeah, those and I think Malcolm is really underappreciated for the things he actually did in music, even with Bow Wow Wow, bringing the Burundi rhythm, you know. And again, he wasn't complete. What he was like a catalyst for these groups, like he was with me. He'd throw this thing in there and go about the square. He would say, listen to this music from this place. And the band would go off and they would make it their own. He wasn't that person that micromanaged everything. He would toss an idea in and then bands would make it into their own, like he did with the Pistols and Johnny Rotten. And then later he did it with Bow Wow Wow. And then he decided to do it by himself. So he definitely is one of the greatest people from that period that you're talking about, you know, the 80s in particular, moving into the 90s. So it was a very exciting period. And during that period, I got to work on videos. I got to work on the Buy Want Candy video, not as a director, but as the creative liaison, as it was called. And Malcolm went with me with specific instructions. Okay, I want you to go to this video, but I don't want to see candy canes in it at all. And, of course, that's what's in it, because I didn't care about the video. I was having too much of a good time being in Los Angeles. It was like, to me, I was having a party. Videos didn't matter then. So I was like, oh, I don't care. And of course, the video comes back and that's all it's got in it, because the guy that did it was some guy from the 1950s who had worked with Elvis, and he was their in-house kind of video guy. And he was this old guy. He was a nice guy, but he was like, it was full of cliches and everything like that. But to me, I thought, I'm just going to have a good time. I don't care about the video. And I did have a good time. But now I look back and I go, oh, God, I really didn't really pay attention to this very much. But it's where I got my beginnings of understanding what music videos were like. But it took a little bit of time before I got into actually doing them myself and then realizing what you could do. And I looked at it in a point where I wasn't a film student. I didn't go to film school. I went to art school. So how can I make art move? And so everything, that's why you got scratches. And I love to use mistakes on my videos. We would put the film in bleach. We would take things to scratch it. We did everything you weren't supposed to do to film if you're a film student. But I was an art student, so I looked at it from a completely different matter. So basically that's it in a nutshell. I went from being an art student when punk started in 1976 and going to see the Pistols and realizing that this was a big moment in history, because it was the beginning and the birth of the amateur, which, up until that period was really dominated by virtuosos, people that went to the Royal College of Art, people went to music, and suddenly anyone could do it. And what it did was it unleashed an incredible wealth of talent that came out of that period that would never normally have ever had the chance to be involved. So that's what was great about punk. And then I think everybody's interpretation, even people like Boy George, who I knew back then, who became very, very sort of middle of the road pop, safe pop music, he came from that energy, and it gave him the courage to go in drag, you know, when nobody else would go. I mean, yeah, having said that, the New York Dolls were great drag queens, you know, but he kind of predicted what was going to eventually become the norm. So I think that was a great. I was lucky. Let's just say this: I was lucky to be in a lot of it was to do with luck. I was in the right place at the right time, and I happened to have an understanding of the art form enough to be able to get through on it and make it into a thing that I created for myself. So it happened pretty rapidly. You know, it went from that. Oh, and then I moved to New York because I wanted to get a different perspective on things. And I was always a big fan of them. I was born on the 4th of July. So it's kind of like I almost had this destiny that I had to come to America. My mother was a massive Hollywood fan. We had books on Hollywood. I knew Hollywood when I came here before I'd ever come here better than I knew some certain parts of London because I read these books. So I came to New York wanting to have a different attitude to things. And then so I got involved with Bob Dylan. You know, I got involved with Bob Dylan because Bob Dylan, who was cool and shrewd enough to see what Malcolm was doing and asked Malcolm if he would do a video for him. So Malcolm sent me along and to investigate. I met Bob and I loved Bob. I loved Bob because I was never a Bob Dylan fan. So I wasn't intimidated by him. Like you mentioned the word Bob Dylan, even to the people up at CBS at the time, they were like in awe of Bob Dylan. I wasn't in awe of Bob Dylan because I wasn't a fan of his. And I said this because I did a recent thing for his website about the record covers. He, to me, more than anyone, is the original punk. And I look at that cover I did for Biograph, and he could be Johnny Thunders, Patti Smith, or Mick Jones in that. There could be any one of those in there. His attitude was very punk. He was very irreverent. He didn't give a shit about what the record label thought. He didn't give a shit about what most people thought. He was eccentric, and he did what he wanted to do. And so my period of working with him through Empire Burlesque, and then through Biograph, and then onto doing his book, to Drawn Blank, was just, I could write a book about those times, the things I did with Dylan and how he was.
Well, can you talk about the Biograph cover? As long as I got you on that. I mean, there you have his face. It's all red. His profile, or it's not the profile. It's his face, and it's all in red. And then you have like these like
Matisse. Matisse.
Yeah. Oh, so yeah, I mean, what was it when you sent this to Dylan? Was he got it immediately, or what were you trying to convey in this?
Well, okay. With Empire Burlesque, when Malcolm said he couldn't do the video, and I said, but I can do your record cover, and they said, great. So I did the record cover, Empire Burlesque, but I was given a photograph that was a really bad photograph. It looked like a bad publicity photograph. I couldn't really do a lot with it, but I made it into something. And at that particular point, I was really being inspired by Matisse, because there'd been this big Matisse retrospective at the Museum of Modern Art. So I used a little bit of that in that cover. And then when Biograph came along, Dylan was really hands-on in that project. And he and I talked about it, and he told me some great stories, you know.
So first of all, Biograph is like, this was the first box set, retrospective of his career. So this was this was the first one I'd ever encountered in the CD, like a box set. So this was kind of the first of its kind.
Box set. Yeah, and it was written by the journalist that went on to become a filmmaker who did Almost Famous.
Cameron Crowe.
He wrote Cameron Crowe. He wrote the sleeve notes to it. Yeah, he wrote the sleeve notes to it. And so with Biograph, Dylan wasn't that interested in it. It was just a bit of a thing, just get the album cover done. But he really liked it, and he liked the way I sort of looked at it and messed up the photograph. So Jeff Rosen, who was I love Jeff Rosen. He ran Dylan's publishing company called Diversity Entertainment. And he was actually really, more than anyone, Bob's right-hand man. And he called me and said, listen, Bob would really love you to do Biograph. It's his first retrospective. It's a big deal. Would you come in and meet with Bob? He wants to talk to you about it. So I went into their offices in New York, in Irvine Place, and sat with Bob, and we went out and had coffee, and he was telling me that he thought it was he found it novel and interesting that people looked so deeply into his work. And he said, for example, people read all this stuff into Positively on 4th Street, and he goes, you know what? I was in a coffee shop on 4th Street. That's where it came from. So I got all these great insights to it. And then I suddenly realized the epic nature of what was ahead of me. Here was a man with this incredible body of work. I mean, so how do you start? I mean, how do you start with all this stuff? And I had access to all the archives of photographs and everything. I went through these things, and then I just saw that picture, and I just thought, my God, that represents how I felt about Bob, like the godfather of punk. He looked great. His hair looked great. The way he was looking to the side, the collar up, all that kind of stuff. And being a punk, I thought, what a great image to use. But I thought, I don't want to make it so it's just this retro, and it's just, even though most of the songs were his old songs. So I wanted to put Bob in a more contemporary, I wanted people to think of Bob as being a more contemporary and relevant person. Like, he's the guy that went to the Newport Folk Festival and went electric. And because everyone told him he couldn't do that, so he did it. And I thought that was absolute a punk attitude to do that. He didn't give a shit what people thought. He went electric when everyone told him he couldn't. So even though I realized I wasn't a fan, I started to realize I was a fan of who he was because of what he'd done. So I found this picture, and there was two things that were happening. There was the Matisse exhibition, and I always wanted. So I took those little bits were from Matisse's Jazz. He did an exhibition called Jazz, and it was like these prints, and they were just shapes and forms. And then there was these artists out of England called Gilbert and George, and there were this gay couple who did these stained glass window things of naked men and just weird stuff, but like a stained glass window. and the red was really powerful. So I laid that red on. So I made it a cross between, 1960s counterculture mixed with the Matisse and then the Gilbert and George. Because at the same time, in 61, I think when Dylan's first record came out, it was also, even though it had been building since the 50s, the explosion of American pop art and Lichtenstein and Rauschenberg and Warhol. And I thought he related to that music, that art scene, I think more than any other artist besides the Velvet Underground. I think he epitomized what that was coming out. So the marriage of the two of them seemed to make really good sense to me, that Bob Dylan was a pop artist in that sense. So I put that together. But again, I was very conscious about it being just a retro album. So I took those two ghosted pictures, very ghosted, faint pictures of Dylan in different periods. Like, I think one was from the 70s, one was from the 80s. And really went through and thought that and realized that it didn't end there, because I had to do the booklet and the back cover. And so I took the Rauschenberg idea for the booklet of Bob Dylan poster that was being peeled off the wall, and then used the picture of him in the frame, the sort of gold picture of him in the frame. And I went to the printers, and I took that job. It was the biggest job I'd had in terms of an album cover. There's no doubt about that, because it wasn't just the front and back and the insert. It was the booklet. It was the record sleeves, the dust sleeves themselves had to have lyrics on them. It was a massive undertaking. And I went to the printers, and I made sure that the printing was done well. And it was a proud moment, and such a proud moment that I got a call from Jeff Rosen, who said, "Oh, I've got something. Bob has got something for you." And I went to the office, and it was the box set that was given to me, and Bob had written on it, "To Nick Egan, thanks for making this what it is. You're a star, Bob Dylan." Oh. And that was a really, that was a proud moment for me, and not being a Bob Dylan fan. And then the fact that the launch of it was in the one of the smaller ones, but it was in Manhattan. I can't remember. But anyway, when I went into it, they had all my artwork blown up to these gigantic sizes hanging on the wall of this museum. And that, again, that was the thing of every artist wants to see their stuff presented like that. And I remember Bob was there, and he kept himself in the back room, and he didn't want to go out and meet anybody. He was so antisocial. The guy just was not interested in shaking anyone's hands at all. But I went in to see him. So and then that was followed by the fact that right after that, I said I was applying for my green card, and my lawyer said, you need some signatures of people who are outstanding in their field of expertise. And so I said, I'll ask Bob. And so I called up Jeff, and I said, "Oh man, do you think Bob will sign my letter of immigration, support of immigration?" And he said, "To be honest, Nick, I doubt it. The last one he signed was for John Lennon, and he's never done it for anyone since." So I said, "Okay." A week later, I get a call from Jeff saying, "Bob's done your letter for you." So he signed my immigration support. Amazing. And I wish I think I lost the letter, but my lawyer drafted it. Basically, he just signed it. It was like, I've been recognised as a person in the 60s that created this and that, and I support Nick Egan's thing for a visa, signed Bob Dylan. But
wow,
I was lucky. At the same time, I got John Hughes to sign mine, because I'd done some stuff with John Hughes, the film director, and INXS. So they couldn't exactly say no, could they, to me? The immigration, they could turn me down based on that one.
Okay, come on, man, these stories are amazing, and I'm so thrilled that we're going to continue this for next week. Next week we start talking videos and all that went on with his directing of Alanis Morissette and Oasis, and so many more stories that we're going to get into. Please sign up for our newsletter at wddimpodcast.com. Thank you again to Nick for giving us his extremely valuable time. It's been a lot of fun. So we will continue next week. And until then, this is Dave.
This is Ollie.
Check you later.
Over and out.